Hi friends, are you ready to start the next few chapters of Front Desk? This is our last few chapters. Let's find out what happens. When we left off, Mia had started asking all of her family and friends and people from the essay contest if they would be willing to donate some money, or not donate, invest in the motel so that they could own this motel, the Cal Vista, together. And so she had just reached her goal of $300,000. Let's find out what happens. Are you ready? Chapter 64. The nerves tingled in my toes as Mr. Yao, Lincoln's navigator, pulled into the motel. We told him on the phone we had something very important to discuss with him. "So, what's this all about?" he asked, plopping himself down on the couch. Nervously, my mom looked at my dad. I glanced toward my room where the trash bag of cash was, and the small kitchen window where Hank's, Billy Bob, and Mrs. Q's heads were squeezed together trying to peer in. They all knew this was the big moment. We'd like to discuss buying the motel," my mom said. Mr. Yao sat up. "Why? Did an interested buyer come?" he asked. My dad cleared his voice. "Yes," he said. "Well, who is it?" Mr. Yao asked. "Us," my dad said. "You?" Mr. Yao said. He started laughing. "How much did you come up with? $500? He chuckled. "Actually, we came up with $300,000, my dad said. Mr. Yao stopped laughing. A war was happening in Mr. Yao's face as denial morphed into rage. "How the heck did you get $300,000? Mr. Yao finally asked. "That's not important," my dad said. "What's important is, do we have a deal or not?" Again, Mr. Yao burst out laughing. "Do we have a deal or not? Who do you think you are?" I jumped in. "He's a guy who's about to buy your motel. That's who he is," I told him. "Oh, no, he's not," Mr. Yao snapped. "There's another buyer interested, and he's offering more." "How much more?" Mr. Yao shrugged. "How much?" my dad repeated. "What's the difference? You can't afford it." "How much?" 50,000. We called up every single investor, but unfortunately nobody had any extra money. They'd already given us every dollar they had. Even Mr. Cooper said his hands were tied. He added that if we didn't go through with the end of the deal by the end of the month, he would need his 50,000 back, so that he could put it into one of his other investments. I dropped my head into my hands. Everything was slipping away. All my hard work. I felt like losing the essay contest all over again, except it hurt so much more because this time I was letting everyone down. I hugged the humongous trash bag of money and cried. I cried for the motel essay contest applicants who once again failed to get a motel. I cried for young Hank, getting pushed around by all those mean kids, and old Hank, 40 years later, still being treated unfairly, and for Lupe's dad, boiling away on the roof of every single day under the blistering sun. I cried for Mr. Aban, the convenience store guy from the Philippines, and Mr. Bagwati, the laundry guy, with his raisiny fingers and hunched back, washing bundle after bundle of clothes. I cried for Uncle Zhang, poor Uncle Zhang, who had no money but still insisted on contributing because it was so important to him to help us in our hour of need. And all the other uncles and aunts who sent us money, hoping for a slice of, however tiny, the American dream. And how I was going to fall apart over $50,000. 50,000. How could we come up with it, even if you opened us up and sold us for parts? Slowly, I stood. I dried my tears, picked up the bag of money, and walked into the living room. "Hey, where are you going with that?" my parents asked me. "I'm going to call the investors, start returning all this money," I told my parents. They shook their heads. "We have an idea," they said. Chapter 65. "No," I said, shaking my head firmly. "Just this once," my dad said. "We were so close. Dad, you saw what happened to Uncle Ming. The memory of his black eye and the bruises on his neck were the loan sharks grabbing him and ripped through me. I know, but this is different. You said it yourself. This is a huge opportunity." I looked up at my dad. I had never seen so much determination and hope in his eyes. "We were this close," my dad said, holding up his fingers. My mother pulled her hand over mine. "Just this once," she repeated. "We'll pay them right back. Just this once." Hour after terrifying hour, I sat up and waited at the front desk. The loan sharks were coming. I pictured hammerheads swimming up to the front desk, glaring at us from the sides of their heads. They pulled into the motel in the black Cadillac DeVille. 3 big Chinese guys stepped out. They were all wearing leather jackets. One of them had a tattoo and the word Rin in Chinese on his neck, which means to suffer. Another had a big tear in his tear in his ear, like someone had tear in his ear, like someone had ripped out his earring. And the third, the boss of the group, had oily skin and long stringy hair, which he wore in a ponytail. There was a great big bulge in his jacket, and I swallowed hard as they stepped through the bulletproof glass door. You understand, for an amount this large, we're going to need some collateral, the oily boss of the loan shark said to my dad. The three of them sat on the small sofa in our living room. With a trembling hand, my mom poured out the last of her jasmine tea. Yes, my dad said, that makes sense. What do you need? Passport ID, he said. I felt myself go cold. But Uncle Zing, I remembered my dad. My dad put a finger over his mouth. Not now. It'll be returned to you, of course, when you pay us back, the oily boss said. His voice lingered. But if you don't pay us back, the $50,000 plus another $20,000 on top, well then, the boss glanced at his associates. His associates stretched out their hands and cracked their knuckles. With every crack, fear jolted down my spine. Chapter 66. It was decided that that afternoon the loan sharks would come back with the $50,000 and my parents would hand over our passports and IDs. I walked to school with nails in my stomach. It was the last day of school. As we cleaned out our desk and counted down to the last hour, Jason walked up to me. Hey, he said. In his hand, he was holding a pencil. It was my sparkly green pencil. Been meaning to give this back to you, he said, handing the pencil to me. I looked down at the pencil in my hands. I'd expected to be super short and beat up by now. I had visions of Jason's dog chewing on it, Jason stabbing things at home with it, wearing it down to a nub, but it was exactly the same length as it was before, beautiful and sparkly as ever. Thank you, I said. This means a lot to me. I hugged my pencil in my hands. I'm sure you'll write great things with it, he added. I looked up at him, surprised, like the piece you wrote about coming to America. A smile stretched across my face. Thanks, I said. Jason looked down at the floor. I'm sorry I made your year so miserable, he said softly. It's okay, I said. I'm sorry, too, for, I could see in his eyes I didn't need to remind him about the time in the auditorium. He probably remembered every day. Here, I have something for you, too, I said. I reached deep into my backpack and pulled out the thank you letter I'd been meaning to give him. I'd been carrying it around in my backpack for months. Jason looked down at the note, surprised. He smiled as he read my words. As I turned to leave, Jason reached out and touched my arm. What? I asked. He's bluffing. There's no other buyer. It's just you guys. He'll take a lot less for the motel. I stared at Jason. His brown eyes blazed with courage. But it was his kindness that blew me away. When the school bell rang, I ran. Chapter 67. As I ran as fast as the wind could carry me, adrenaline powering my skinny little legs, with each step I whispered a prayer, please let me get there before the loan sharks do. I turned the corner onto Coast Boulevard just as the loan sharks' Cadillac pulled into the motel. As the three loan sharks got out of their car with their suitcases full of cash, I raced to the parking lot screaming, Mom! Dad! Don't do it! Mr. Yao's bluffing! My parents promptly called the deal off. The loan sharks grumbled about how they came all this way and went to a great deal of effort to put the money together. So my dad gave them $20 for the gas and their troubles, and they piled back into their car and left. As they drove away, my parents collapsed to the ground. That was close, my mother exclaimed. My dad put his hand over his pounding heart as he stared at the wide open sky. Thank God, my dad said. As my parents lay panting on the side of the parking lot, I walked over to the front desk and called Mr. Yao. Mr. Yao, we'd like to make an offer of the motel. I said, $300,000, not a penny more. He said yes. I screamed, running through the motel. The Weekleys were in Hank's room playing Monopoly. When they heard the news that Mr. Yao agreed to sell to us, Hank slapped the Monopoly board and all the pieces went flying. What'd I tell ya, Hank said to Billy Bob. If it can't happen in Monopoly, it can happen here in real life. Mr. Yao came over with Jason and his real estate agent the next day, as did Lupe's dad, Mr. Cooper, the immigrants, Mr. Abayan from the convenience store, Mrs. Bulguati from the laundromat, and some of the SA people who had driven down because they wanted to see their new motel in their very own eyes. Mr. Cooper brought over his lawyer friend who helped us draw up the contract. There were so many people we couldn't all fit in the manager's quarters. We had to put chairs on tables out in the parking lot. All right, let's get this over with, Mr. Yao said. It took ages for Mr. Yao and his agent to count up all the money. When He was finally convinced it was all there. Mr. Yao lugged the bag over to the car and dumped it in the trunk. His agent then sat down with Mr. Cooper's lawyer and pored over the sales purchase agreement. We all huddled around them, watching as they wrote each of our names under buyer. There were so many owners, we needed 3 additional pages just to fill out our names. My father's voice shook as he told the agent below how to spell his name. I never thought this day would actually happen, he said. Said my friend. Me neither, my friend, said Hank, putting an arm around my dad's shoulder. Me neither. When everyone finished signing their names, Mr. Yao officially handed my parents the keys. Lupe and I jumped up and down, screaming, "We did it! We did it! We did it!" Jason smiled. "You know what I'm going to do?" Hank said, his eyes twinkling. "What?" I asked. Hank ran toward the sparkling blue pool. He let out a yelp and jumped in, fully clothed. "Hey!" Mr. Yao called out, but only with a fraction of his usual voice. "You can't jump in my pool with your clothes on." "It's not your pool anymore," Hank called back. Mr. Yao opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. One by one, Lupe and all the Wigglies and SA people and immigrants jumped in too. My dad threw my mom in, and my mom shrieked with glee. Everyone was waiting for me to come in. I turned to Jason. "You coming?" I asked him. Jason turned to his dad and asked if he could stay. Mr. Yao scoffed. "You don't want to go swimming with these losers, do you?" he asked his son. Jason shook his head. "No, Dad," he said. "I'm going swimming with the winners." Hand in hand, we jumped in the pool. As we splashed and swam the sun-kissed water, and my mother suddenly remembered something very important. Wait, she said. "Let's get a picture." "I'll take it." Hank jumped out and held his hand up and clicked. I looked around at my new family and smiled. It was a picture I'd been waiting a long, long time for. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed this book called The Front Desk. Remember, this is an OBOB book for 3rd through 5th graders. So you are already one up on it. We would love to have you on our team if this was something that interested you. All right, I will talk to you next time.